All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Kristen Acklick, and I'm a professor in education and the director of the Leahy Center for the Environment. Before we launch into the topic and connections of the evening, I first want to share with you that this series is an uplift event. So for those of you who have entered, Liz has a QR code, and you can scan that to register. So I'm just going to read the little uplift blurb. Thank you for attending this uplift qualifying event. Uplift encourages and supports programs that promote self-awareness, understanding, and cultural competency. We want our students to live honestly, respectfully, and inclusively while doing well and doing good. And this program today provides an opportunity for you to learn and grow in global citizenship, interpersonal development, and/or personal wellness. Students are encouraged to snap the QR code with Liz to track their attendance and automatically be entered into winning Uplift prize drawing at the end of the semester. Prizes have included items like gift cards, a free parking spot, game systems, and more. The more Uplift events you attend each semester, the more chances you have to win. As a precursor to the bigger prize drawing at the end of the semester, we'd like to thank those of you who are here tonight by giving away 3 small prizes to a few lucky winners, and that will happen at the end of this session during the Q&A. So, now to the why of why we're here tonight. The center seeks to prepare our students to think and act critically and creatively, evolve the culture of sustainability on campus and in our community, and to foster connections between students and career experts. We do all of this with lots of coordination and cooperation with our facility and programs across the student life and academic opportunities of our college, to create immersive opportunities that build career skills, experiences, and portfolios, to understand our collective social impact, and to find our individual purpose. This method of teaching and learning is how we centralize a huge, in both breadth and depth, content area, if only for the purposes of seeing the impact of small moments of advocacy, education, and change on the collective shared resource, Earth. In the age of a rising presence of artificial intelligence in our lives, this is one opportunity to put our human intelligence into practice. Social impact, purpose, and environmental innovation require a human head, a human heart, and a human hand. I'm not sure there's a better call to action for the importance of a liberal arts education in our lives, one that all of us here today are privileged to teach and learn from. Tonight's speaker embodies this approach as he uses multiple media and approaches to educate and spur environmental awareness and change through art. I've had the opportunity to see the power of this approach and to collaborate with Brian on this work over the last 9 years through his art and ecology course and several sustainable campus education initiatives we've brought to St. Michael's. In his talk, Professor Brian Collier examines the history, culture, and ecological impact of lawns, hoping to inspire people to shift away from the unquestioned habit of continuous lawn mowing and the many negative impacts it has had on the world around us. He asks us to consider, how much lawn do we really need? Brian Collier's projects and public interventions span a wide variety of media, photography, drawing, video, sculpture, artists' books, installations, and performance. His research-based practice is focused on elements of the other-than-human natural world that exists, or have reinserted themselves in human-dominated environments. Collier's work has appeared in solo and group exhibitions around the world, around the US and abroad. A partial list of venues includes the Power Plant Gallery at Duke University, the Fleming Museum at the University of Vermont, the Deutsche Bank's 60-wall gallery in New York City, the News Museum Weisberg Bremen in Bremen, Germany, Boulder Museum of Contemporary Art in Boulder, Colorado, Contemporary Art Center of North Adams, Massachusetts, a number of venues in Cuba, New York, and others. He received grants from the Arts Council of the Metropolitan Kansas City, Illinois Art Council, New York Foundation of the Arts, and the City of Bloomington Cultural District Commission. Reviews and articles about Collier's work have appeared in a variety of publications, among them Art in America, the New York Times, After Image, After Papers Magazine, Domus, the Chicago Reader, Orion, Nature, Culture, and Place, the Burlington Free Press. His work is also included in the books Art and Ecology Now from Thames and Hudson Press, Eco Art in Action from New Village Press, The Object from MIT Whitechapel Press, Weather Report, Art and Climate Change, edited by Lucy Lippard, and Say It Isn't So, Art Trains Its Sight on the Natural Sciences, Weiserberg Museum of Modern Art. Next up for Collier is a solo exhibition at Idaho State University on his very project that we have the opportunity to witness, contemplate, and perhaps even act on here tonight. So without any further more from me, Professor Brian Collier.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out. Thanks so much, Kristen, for the introduction, the kind introduction, and also all the work you've done for the Center for the Environment. Thanks also to Ruth, Fabian Fine, who organized this series, and thanks to the marketing folks for all the hard work you've done promoting these talks. Around 80% of all animals on Earth are insects. This includes the butterflies, bees, moths, flies, wasps, and beetles that are categorized as pollinators. In 2017, a study was published by the journal Nature showing the biomass of flying insects in over 60 protected natural areas in Germany had declined by approximately 75% over the past 3 decades. This was followed by another long-term study that's commonly referred to as the Munich study, confirming those results and providing more evidence of large declines in overall numbers of insect populations in both farmland and forest across vast areas of Germany and Switzerland. Similar declines have been documented in other long-term studies of European and North American regions, and insect declines have been documented globally over the same period of time. This decline is obviously alarming and has dire implications for the health of our entire ecosystem, including the food systems that we rely on. The decline is attributed to a number of factors, including the ecological impacts from conventional industrial-scale agriculture, increased use of pesticides, the many impacts of human-caused climate change, and habitat loss. The last in this list of causes, habitat loss, is the center of much of my art and ecology work for the past 20 years, and a primary focus of the project I'm going to talk about today, which is to help pollinators and all ecologically adjacent species by turning unused or underutilized lawns into ecologically beneficial habitat. Unlike some of the potential solutions for the other environmental problems we're facing, this is actually something that anyone who maintains a lawn can do quickly and easily with the added benefit of saving time and money. My proposal is simply to survey the land around your homes and workplaces to determine if currently mowed areas are being used in a way that requires them to be mowed. Start by asking yourself a couple of questions. First, are people only in the land when they're mowing it? Or are you just mowing your lawn for aesthetic and cultural conformity? If the site isn't a sports field, play space, or recreational space, which we obviously need to keep mowed so we can use them for those purposes, you can simply stop mowing them and watch the site transform. So I've been working with these sites that have turned from lawn to meadow for a couple of decades, and I'm always amazed at how quickly the site transforms from a green carpeted ecological desert to a vibrant habitat buzzing with life. It always starts with small creatures, bees, butterflies, moths, beetles, spiders, and more. You can usually hear the transformation as you approach these sites before you see it. As it grows, birds, small mammals, amphibians, and reptiles move in. And I've been amazed by my observations proving that even small sites can support a remarkable number and diversity of species. If you increase plant diversity by adding regionally native anchor species like milkweed, goldenrod, sweet Joe pie, coneflower, asters, and bee balm, you can actually attract a larger diversity of wildlife and increase animal diversity at the site overall. So for a number of years now, I've been working on creating more pollinator habitat through my ongoing art and ecology project called Unlawning America. I first launched the project in 2017 at a 2-venue exhibition at Burlington City Arts here downtown and Shelburne Farms. The central goal of this project is to help influence a cultural shift away from the dominance of mowed lawn and to encourage people to allow mowed lawn that is not used to grow into ecologically beneficial meadow habitat. Like almost all my work for the past 25 years, Unlawning America is a research-based interdisciplinary art project that examines specific examples of our impact on the other species we share the planet with. And I'm particularly interested in increasing awareness of our inseparable connection to all aspects of the natural world. My ultimate goal as an artist is to create and present work that makes it difficult for people to ignore the animals and plants they encounter in their daily lives, inspiring them to make choices that are less harmful to our shared ecosystems. I believe this is especially important work because of the number of environmental concerns we are currently facing. The effects of climate change, mass extinction, habitat loss, toxins in our earth, air, and water, environmental and political problems stemming from our reliance on fossil fuels, and as I mentioned, the alarming and rapid decline of insect populations globally. These are complex problems with the need for immediate action, yet we continue to be slow to respond. The growing weight of these challenges and the threat that they present to the well-being of all species require a multi-pronged strategy. If I'm being honest, based on many years working on environmentally focused projects, I come to the realization, which is kind of hard to admit, that humans can be a short-sighted, selfish species. Many have a hard time doing things that don't benefit them directly and rarely respond to things they don't perceive as a personal existential threat. Contemporary Americans tend to like quick, simple solutions. Many either choose to ignore the problems we face or feel so overwhelmed that they don't know where to begin and end up doing almost nothing. There are also many examples of people working to make things better. This is like the work being done in connection with our own Center for the Environment here. These demonstrate we all have the capacity for positive change. Many just need some motivation and direction. People who stop to ask questions and think instead of allowing themselves to be influenced by leaders or corporations who are motivated by the accumulation of wealth and power often come to the realization that just because something is common practice doesn't make it best practice. Fortunately, there are a significant number of individuals and organizations working to shift the ways we think about green space management and the health of our shared ecosystems. Ron Finley, who's pictured here at the center top, is a fantastic example of this kind of thinking and action by challenging conventions he saw as wrong. He started a movement for growing fresh food in his neighborhood in South Central LA, which is actually a food desert where fresh, healthy food is very, very difficult to find, where he rejected and worked to change city ordinances about green space use by replacing the small mowed strip of land in front of his house with a food garden available to anyone in his neighborhood. This activity spread, and now people living in this area participate in growing their own healthy, fresh food. It also triggered a legal battle after he got sued by the city against city ordinances and changed the law about how and where people could grow food in flower gardens. In a rare case, he actually won the lawsuit, so it was fantastic. The work of Finley and others are making some headway, but cultural barriers based on aesthetics, conformity, and fear prevent many of us from participating in these kinds of ecologically beneficial activities. The continued dominance of unused mowed lawn is what motivated me to create the Unlawning America project to contribute to the efforts of enabling people to make environmentally positive change. Although the practice of not mowing is becoming more visible and a bit more accepted, especially over the past couple of years, you need only look around you, no matter where you live, to realize the efforts to move away from mowed lawn have yet to produce a significant shift away from their dominance in the landscapes of both our homes and our workplaces. My goal is to help create a cultural shift where the weird neighbor is no longer the one who doesn't mow their lawn, but instead is the one who does. So why do we have lawns? Most Americans have been conditioned to want large expanses of mowed lawn, and many believe turf grass is the best option for our residential, commercial, and institutional landscapes. This cultural tradition can be traced back to English and French manners, where the lawn was a display of wealth. Home lawns in the US started appearing in the decades after the Civil War due to the growing availability of lawnmowers, and then lawns spread thanks to the proselytizing of landscape architects Jackson Downing and his protege, Frank Scott. Recognize that name associated with lawn care, Scott? That's the guy. Then there was a great expansion of lawns in post-World War II America, when lawn-filled housing projects exploded across the country. And because few think of lawns in a historical context, we unquestioningly accept lawn as an essential component of American middle-class identity. Unlawning America is designed to make ecologically harmful landscaping practices more visible and less ordinary to us. My project celebrates unmowed green space and models alternatives to mowed lawn. Perhaps more importantly, it's designed to frame non-lawn green space, which many see as messy or undesirable, as ecologically and aesthetically valuable. This work challenges our deeply seated perceptions and reminds us that these were established through misdirected cultural traditions and questionable beliefs. The project highlights the enormous amounts of labor and cost, both financial and environmental, that lawn maintenance requires. There are significant and immediate savings of time and money by simply stopping or reducing mowing in places we don't use. This is especially true for institutions and business properties that mow vast areas of lawn that nobody ever steps foot in unless they're maintaining it. Based on all this information, I believe the case for not mowing is strong, and the solution I'm proposing is incredibly easy. Just stop mowing what you don't use. You're going to hear me say that a lot. By not mowing the lawns that aren't used, we can reduce carbon emissions, reduce the amount of nitrates and chemicals going into our earth, air, and water, use less water, and most importantly, create habitat for insects and other species vital to the health of our ecosystems. So, if you still need a little bit more, let's look at some facts. Lawn is one of the largest irrigated crops in the continental US, taking up more than 40 million acres of land, second only to corn. Most people don't think of lawn as a cultivated crop, but that's exactly what it is, even though it doesn't provide any of our food or energy needs. Aside from the relatively small amount of lawn that's actively used for sports and play areas, lawn's only function is cultural conformity based on what I propose are misguided aesthetic standards. Lawn has been described by ecologists as an ecological desert, meaning it provides almost nothing for more than 99% of all species. Lawn is also linked to a number of serious environmental problems through the use of herbicides, pesticides, fertilization, water use, and pollution from mowing. In more arid regions of the country, watering a lawn can make up to 75% total household water consumption. A study from Purdue University shows that urban areas use 30 to 60% of all fresh water just to water lawns. Then there's the issue of water contamination, which is very real to us who live in the Lake Champlain Basin. 67 million pounds of synthetic pesticides and 47 million pounds of herbicides are used each year on lawns in the US. Much of this is carried away as runoff. Excess nutrients from grass clippings and fertilizers contribute to algae blooms, which deplete oxygen in the water, making it unsafe for recreational use. This also can kill fish and many other complex life forms. The transmission of these chemicals is made worse when frequently mowed grass, which does little to slow water runoff, is directly next to water bodies, hardscape, or sewer drains. Mowing with a gas-powered mower is one of the most harmful activities related to keeping a lawn. Older, less efficient two-cycle engines release 25 to 30% of their oil and gas unburned into the air. The EPA estimates that approximately 800 million gallons of gas are used each year for mowing, with as much as 17 million gallons of that being spilled on the ground per year. Mowing also produces very large amounts of air pollution, much greater than cars and trucks. According to the same EPA study, 1 hour of mowing with a new gas-powered mower produces more air pollution than 11 new gas-powered cars driven for the same amount of time. Our choice to keep frequently mowed lawn, even when we're not irrigating or using pesticides and herbicides, is directly harming our local ecosystems by suppressing plant growth, eliminating habitat for declining species, and significantly contributing to our carbon footprint. As I already mentioned, the growing body of scientific evidence showing large global population declines of insects is a real and present threat to the health of all the Earth's ecosystems. Even iconic species like the monarch butterfly are in sharp decline due to a combination of climate change and habitat loss, and have recently been listed by the IUCN as endangered. When working on an earlier project to increase unmediated wild habitat, I was speaking with a biologist from the Illinois Natural History Survey about the reasons for the monarch's decline. He said the main reason is habitat loss, and stated plainly, more milkweed means more monarchs, period. It's easy to extrapolate that more pollinator-friendly plants and habitat will mean more pollinators as well. More habitat will also help these species be more resilient to the inevitable challenges of climate change. So I want you to imagine the immediate ecological benefit of half of those 40 million acres of mowed lawn becoming pollinator-friendly meadows. Imagine walking on a path through a diverse meadow buzzing with life, rather than a green carpet almost devoid of any other life than suppressed European grasses. Currently, most lawn is mowed about once every week or two with gas-powered mowers. Imagine the reduction in carbon emissions if we cut mower use by half or more. I invite people to consider the negative impacts of keeping a lawn and the many ecological and financial benefits of unlawning. So a little history for the project. Unlawning America is a continuum of other work I started about 2 decades ago, specifically this project called the Highway Expedition. I became interested in the highway right-of-way along my commuter route in central Illinois as a unique habitat influenced mainly by the fact that I learned Illinois is 49th out of the 50 states in terms of remaining undisturbed natural area. Most of the original prairie was plowed under for agriculture and residential use by the early 20th century, making me wonder, where did all the plants and animals go? Were they just completely gone? Then as I drove along the interstate highway every day, I noticed a vibrant world of unmowed area that was full of prairie plants, birds, and a great diversity of insects and spiders squeezed in this little strip of land between the road surface and vast expanses of corn and soybeans that are in that region. After gaining official permission from the Illinois Department of Transportation and doing quite a bit of background research, I proceeded to explore this landscape by walking both sides of the I-74 right-of-way between my home and workplace, recording observations, taking photos and videos, and collecting plant specimens. I did this exploration in 23 individual trips from 2005 to 2007, covering more than 115 miles of right-of-way. The materials generated from this expedition were presented in a series of art exhibitions, including photographs, videos, dioramas, objects, and a website. And these are just a few shots of what those exhibitions looked like. This is kind of how the ecological work, the interdisciplinary work manifests as art. So this project was my first direct experience of the incredible resilience of wild plants and animals, and was a foundational influence on the Unlawning America project by showing that even the most apparently impoverished habitats can be invaluable to sustain a wide variety of wild species when simply left alone. And this is especially true in places that just don't have all that much natural habitat. After completing the highway expedition in '07, I wanted to find a way to help increase native plant diversity in these right-of-way habitats. So I created the Highway Traveler Native Seed Dispersal Program. This is one of now many seed dispersal programs I've done all around the country, and these offer locally native seeds encased in compost and clay seed balls to the public for dispersal in the environment. In this case, they were designed for highway travelers to throw out their car windows into the highway right-of-way. And there's a little trick here because technically it's littering to throw things out of your car window. So I'm inviting people to do something legal to increase the ecological diversity at the site. So I was a little messing around. I like to mess with people a little bit sometimes. All right. And I just did a seed ball workshop on Friday here through the Center for the Environment, which was great. So those seed ball projects led directly to this thing, which is called the Biodiversity Enhancement Disc, or BED, that I made for Unlawning America. The cardboard ring is designed to prevent growth of other plants, while the center disc, made from the same mix as my seed balls, is allowed to grow. The Biodiversity Enhancement Disc increases pollinator plant diversity at an unlawn site. You can simply throw this into the mowed area before you stop mowing, and then let a pod of native plants grow up among the other growing plants. And it's kind of fun because you can throw it like a Frisbee. Another project experimenting with increasing unmediated green space is this project, the Habitat Acquisition Program. And this was intended to give the illusion that a site had been officially protected as an important habitat. The project was as much a social experiment as an ecological art project. Now, to create the appearance of authority, I used my quasi-fictional organization called the Society for a Renatural Environment, or SRNE. And the sites selected were never in individual homeowners' yards, but always carefully selected sites owned by local governments, institutions, or large businesses. So once I identified a site, I would go out and isolate it with these keep out signs with the hope that the signs would be respected and the site would be allowed to develop into a relatively unmolested re-natural habitat. This is despite the fact that this is a completely unsanctioned activity. I would just go do that. I never asked permission. So there's where the social experiment part comes in. I acquired habitats at a number of sites, mostly in the Midwest, and have had varying degrees of success. My first site was a groundhog burrow I found in an otherwise unused mowed field at the University of Illinois, and was quite successful. When the mowers saw the signs, they started mowing around them, making for a much happier groundhog home, which you can see. I don't know, is it possible to see if a groundhog's happy or sad? I don't know. He looks pretty happy to me. So I was then contacted by someone from the university stating there was a construction project plan for the site and offering to trap and relocate the groundhog. I replied by saying, I think it'll probably move on its own and you can just leave it alone. So they did. But then I went back to the site to see what had happened after the construction project had started. I was amazed to find that the construction workers had carefully avoided my site, leaving it intact in the midst of the construction chaos. And remember, this is a completely unsanctioned activity. I've done a bunch of these, like I said. This is a site, it's an urban site that there was a little green space that they were mowing and people would just walk their dogs in there. I put the signs up and it turned into this amazing little urban bird habitat. And this is our most successful example to date, which is still going and now has developed into a small urban woodland. Projects like these might seem disconnected from what some people might recognize as quote-unquote art. Or you may have been asking yourself, why is somebody who calls themselves an artist talking to me about ecological issues? First, I'd like to say that the problems I'm addressing, although they cause direct and measurable ecological impacts, are caused by cultural practices and aesthetic preferences. There are few disciplines with more training on how to navigate and influence culture and aesthetics than the arts. This kind of interdisciplinary art is grounded in the careful study of scientific research, which is then combined with the tools and strategies of art production and presentation. Without going into an extensive art history lesson, suffice it to say that this kind of research-based artwork has deep connections to well-established modern and contemporary art practices from the last 60 years or so. But because the project is designed for engaging an audience outside of a conventional art gallery, art museum context, I bring an easy and direct art historical reference in right at the point of entry. For those who don't recognize it, the image used in the project logo is actually from Albrecht Dürer's Great Piece of Turf. This is a watercolor painting he made in Germany in 1503, and at that time the first waves of European colonization were underway in the Americas. His painting depicts many plants that we now identify as lawn weeds, making it an ideal candidate as a visual art-based starting point for the project, and also a prophetic allusion to the flora of our built environments today. There are a number of strategies I propose and have field tested to help people successfully participate in Unlawning America. The first pictured here is called weed shaping, where unmowed areas are left in geometric shapes with a reduced mowed area surrounding them. That area is then allowed to grow with either no intervention or very low intervention, and this works especially well for inexpensive lawn reductions at a wide range of sites. Instead of trying to have an entire site grow into a wild meadow, which can leave you vulnerable to government fines or angry neighbors, depending on where you live, you can simply create one or more shape-bordered areas, thereby simulating the look of garden beds. Fencing helps tremendously with this strategy, and there are many options available. In this case, it's just a simple rope fence. Weedscaping is a technique where you can move plants that are already growing at a site to create arrangements that look more intentionally ordered. In this picture, beautiful and beneficial native milkweed plants have been grouped together on the front edge of an unlawned area on the edge of our campus, just over here on the edge of Gilbrook. This is a no-cost method to transition spaces potentially seen as unkempt into something more closely resembling managed planting. The best part is because you're utilizing plants that have grown there on their own, you can be confident that they'll thrive in that space with no further management. A meadow path is the practice of only cutting 6 to 10 foot wide paths through a green space instead of mowing the whole site. This allows for easy movement through the site with a minimum of mowing, and you need only mow when the path gets too high for walking. This is a great strategy for sites that people still need to travel through and is used heavily throughout our own St. Mike's natural area across the street. Bordering is the practice of mowing only 10 to 20 foot borders around buildings or use-specific mowed areas like play spaces, surrounded by unmowed meadow. This works best when combined with meadow paths for accessing those used sites. Thoughtfully designed signs informing visitors why the area is not being mowed can go a long way to easing negative responses to what some will otherwise see as a messy and problematic activity. This is the sign that I designed to be used when unlawning a site in association with my project. And this sign, or any well-designed interpretive signage, helps tremendously with public perception. To extend my project further, I've also developed an unlawning kit, which includes a sign, marking flags, a poster, stickers, and a booklet with information and strategies. There's also a biodiversity enhancement disc embedded in the lid of the kit for the box. So you just rip the lid off, you pull back the label, and you put it down, and native plants will grow out of it. And yes, it works. I've tried it a bunch of times. Over the past several years, the project has continued to grow with sites at locations across the US, including the continuation of the first site from back in 2017 at Shelburne Farms, which is pictured here. Additional sites in Vermont. This is actually one up on North Campus. And I've sent signs and kits to people who've started unlawning in Connecticut, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Minnesota, California, Missouri, North Carolina, Michigan, Maryland, Florida, Arizona, Idaho, and Georgia. Of course, there's no need to use my signs or my kits, follow my specific suggestions, or identify yourself participating with my project in any way. You can simply stop mowing or mow far less than you do now and watch what happens. I just want people to do this. In the years I've been working with and observing the development of these sites, I'm always amazed at the resilience of the other than human natural world and the speed at which things recolonize land once we leave it alone. For any who have concerns about things we classify as weeds or pests in these unmowed sites, I want to point out that often when we find plants or animals in what we consider the wrong places, we don't value them in the same way that we would value them when found in the so-called right places. It's important to realize these are often the same animals and plants providing the same ecological functions they do in places we classify as sanctioned nature. It's our inability to consider our built environment as an integral part of the broader ecosystem that prevents us from valuing these species. It's important to note that there are some problematic invasive species that reduce biodiversity, and they do need to be managed. For the vast majority of other introduced or displaced plants and animals, who are we to determine what the right or wrong places are? Who are we to say what belongs in a severely disturbed habitat that's regrowing into a wild green space? The fact that these species are present means those places are either right for them or that there is simply no other place for them to go. I'm a huge supporter of increasing biodiversity at all these sites, and if we do this, using as many regionally native species as possible. However, the vilification and eradication of plants and animals that we decide don't belong is a deeply problematic strategy. In these human-disturbed areas, non-indigenous naturalized species live in a complex relationship with all the other species in the ecosystem, like the relationship between dandelions and early emerging native bees. If we push these species out of even imperfect situations, like a lawn which has become a meadow, their absence could harm the native species that have come to rely on them. So I'll leave you by just restating the central idea of the project. By simply reducing or eliminating mowing, and by not using herbicides, pesticides, or fertilizers, we can make significant and measurable improvements to our local ecosystems. The need for change is immediate, especially for declining insect populations. We can help our ecosystems become healthier and more resilient to the coming changes. This is something we can do here, and this is something we can do now. Thank you. So I'm happy to take any questions at all. Okay. American Meadows has a great native seed mix, and they have a lot of excellent resources there. It can be hard to plant from seed. It's best to plant from plugs if you can afford them. Again, I don't know what's growing. Every site that we do this at is different. And it's amazing, actually, when you stop mowing in most sites, there's this incredible seed bank in the lawn that's just been suppressed. And when you see it growing up, there's often a lot of interesting native species. That's why it's kind of jokey to call it weedscaping, but that's a real strategy where you can actually move and encourage and propagate native plants that are growing in there, or naturalized non-native species that are really pretty good for the site. But American Meadows is the source that I would send you to first, and they're a local organization.
For students who ask any questions, we have a couple of prizes. So
Nobody wants any cookies?
if that moves you.
So where I'm from in southern New York, the highways have a lot of like invasive vine species. Is there any worry with like not mowing those areas and increase of those, like the invasive species?
Yeah, this gets into a whole other debate about what we consider invasive and not. Most of the things people have a gut reaction to call invasive are actually not so. Invasive species are a real problem, as I mentioned. Those are species that come in and take over the site and actually reduce biodiversity. But even then, what we're talking about is a lot of these sites are severely disturbed habitat where not a lot of things are growing and things can't grow. This is not, I'm not talking about this activity. I've had a lot of conversations with people where they get a little upset and they say, oh, if we sort of celebrate these what we call novel ecosystems, which are ecosystems that have evolved into or develop into disturbed habitats. This is not the sort of pristine wild spaces. These are spaces that are kind of like, the reason those things grow there is because those have evolved as colonizers and they move in. In some cases, there's a site that I'm working with that has quite a lot of parsnip in it, which is kind of an interesting plant. Everybody calls it poison parsnip. Poison parsnip is this horrible thing, right? Poison parsnip is genetically identical to the parsnip that you buy at the grocery store and eat. I don't know if you knew that. It's not poison. The regular parsnip, anyway, and it also, a lot of these species that we call invasive are not necessarily invasive in the way that you think of it. It's like vilification, right? So they provide an ecological benefit. They're an umbrella form flower that a lot of native animals use. So yes, there is definitely a problem with truly invasive species that come in. Garlic mustard is a really good example because it goes in and it suppresses growth in the understory of a forest, and that's a problem that needs to be dealt with. Buckthorn is another one, but there's not a lot. People think about, they see these things as weeds and they get really upset and fired up, and they go in and they spend all this time and energy pulling them out, where actually if they just let the habitat grow and evolve, that particular site will generate its own ecological balance over time. You just have to be patient with it.
We have a question from our audience on the live stream. The person who's watching asks, how can we help neighbors to stop mowing so much?
Help neighbors to stop mowing so much?
Yep, neighbors.
That's a heavy lift right there. People love their lawns, and they love their lawns. They've convinced themselves that it's the way to do it. And there's, the lawn industry is powerful and rich and has spent a lot of energy generating advertising and generating news stories that say why it's so terrible to not mow your lawn. They make you afraid of weeds, they make you afraid of insects, they make you afraid of everything, and so they get you to buy their products and mow. So the real answer to that question, again, is not easy. It's conversations. Modeling this activity for your neighbors and talking to them about why you're doing it. And I know that's a hard thing to ask. That takes my super easy thing to do and makes it hard, so, but that's the real answer.
Going off the idea of invasive species, have you seen any examples where relawning or renaturing specific areas has had an impact on the truly invasive species that you mentioned?
In terms of having them grow and dominate the landscape? No. There's always a period of time. Again, it takes patience because there's always a period of time. Those invasive species, they're colonizers. Like when you have a disrupted site, they're going to want to come in. But if you wait, the best thing to do in a site that does have invasive species present is to interplant it with really hardy native species, you know? And these are things that you see growing in places that they haven't been planted and they just want to grow. The milkweeds, a lot of the asters will grow in places like that, the Joe Pye weed, goldenrod. If you want to take over a site, plant some goldenrod, it'll take over the site, right? And it's a native species that's really beneficial to all the local fauna.
Do you have a website or some wider way to share this information?
Do I have a website?
Yeah.
Yes, briandcollier.net.
What would you say to someone who's concerned about a potential increase in ticks and tick-borne illness?
So ticks is a subject that came up right at the beginning of the project for obvious reasons, right? People are terrified of ticks and tick-borne diseases. So I started to do tons of research in it. So the first thing that I'll say is these are spaces we don't use, right? The whole idea behind this is we don't bodily inhabit those spaces. So you don't have to worry about if there's ticks presence or not. The other thing is, I was very curious as to what, because there's all this, again, this is a lot of things, a lot of studies pushed out by the lawn industry that say, oh, if you gotta mow your lawn, otherwise you're gonna have ticks. That's not really accurate. Actually, these meadow landscapes have a very low occurrence of ticks. Where ticks live is on forest edges, on the shrubby edges. And there's a biologist, Dave Allen, who works out at Middlebury, who actually did some great work where he had his students go out and drag they did a big project at Middlebury creating a lot of no-mow space. And he would have his students go out. How you find ticks is you take a white towel or a piece of cloth and you drag it through the site. And in the no-mow areas that they have on campus, guess how many ticks they found? Anybody? 0, right? Part of that, and he'll say when I talk to him about this, he said part of that is because those areas are surrounded by either a sidewalk or some mowed areas, right? When they're adjacent to a forest where the ticks mostly live, right on that edge, the ticks do come out, but not more than about maybe 6 to 8 feet, right? And then as you get further into that meadow space, the tick prevalence goes down dramatically. So that's my 2 answers. One is a little bit more long-winded than the other, but these are not places that we're going into, so who cares? Like, there's a lot of animals that eat ticks. Like birds, all bird species. Do you like birds? All bird species feed their children, feed their babies insects. If we don't have insects, we're gonna lose our birds and everything else, right?
Have you had any times where propagating specific plant species instead of just letting a whole environment renature itself caused harm? I think I lost where I was going with that. But essentially, like specific native species versus the entire set that would just grow naturally. Is there a specific issue with doing that, or?
With adding species?
Well, choosing specific native species versus letting the entire ecological system reproduce. I'm not sure the exact
I don't know if I
verbiage to
totally
use.
understand your question, but you got to be really careful with what plants you add to a site. there's always, like, all these are disturbed sites that have been, you know, they're in our built environment, right? So they're full of European species. And I mean, I don't know if you guys know this. Actually, there's a part of this project where I have an herbarium that talks about the plants that grow in our built environment, and it's called Useful Plants of the Unmowed Lawn. Because the weeds, the things that we call weeds in our lawn, were brought here intentionally by the European colonists because they're extremely useful as food and medicine, right? And they're also, a lot of them have good benefits to pollinators. There is a lot of debate about whether these introduced species have as much benefit to the native pollinators as the native plants, and most evidence points that they don't have as much, but they certainly have a hell of a lot more than mowed grass, right?
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Thanks. This has been great. I have a field next to my house that, out of laziness, we haven't mowed. I don't have a tractor big enough. I haven't been able to mow it, and we've just let it go. And it's, I mean, a lot of the pictures you show resemble what the field has become, and it's really interesting how it's grown up and the different flowers that are growing and grouping together. But now it's starting to become a forest.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if I want that.
So we live in a forest region. So the Great Eastern Forest, when the Europeans first came, was all the way from up north all the way down to Florida and all the way east to somewhere in Ohio. And it was all a giant contiguous forest, right? If you stop like dealing with areas around here, they really want to be forest. Of course there's, you know, patchiness and stuff, but you don't get into kind of that open savanna until you get out to the Midwest and the prairie. So if you don't want it to be forest, you do have to probably brush hog it, but you only have to do it once every like 3 years. The other strategy, and I do this in some of my areas that I don't want to be forest, you can go in and you can just hand prune things. It depends on the size of the site, but because you don't have to do it very often, once a tree gets up to about, a tree or shrub gets up to about that, you can just go in and cut it down or pull it out. Again, it depends on what you want to do. If you do choose to mow or brush hog a site, be very careful when you do it. Usually because if you do it at the wrong time, you're killing a lot of species that are utilizing it. So if you do it right around, like before anything starts to happen, like right around the end of mud season, right at that cusp, that's a good time to kind of clear out woody species. Declan McCabe has a lot to say on the subject of when to do that activity for obvious reasons.
What are the plants in front of you? Or was that not a part of your?
They're grocery store plants.
Oh.
I don't, what are they, mums?
Thanks.
Yeah, I know. Actually, I mean, for an artist, I have a pretty broad knowledge of native plants, but grocery store plants, not so much.
I think we have time for one more question, if anybody has any.
Nothing?
Seeing none. Well, thank you again, Professor Collier. Let's give him a round of applause. That was an excellent presentation.
Thank you.